Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Enviro Geeks. I'm your host, Emily, and this week I'm joined by no one. It's going to be just me and you this week. And this week we're going to talk about water pollution. Alrighty, guys, so like I said, we're going to talk about water pollution this week. So, why does water pollution matter? Well, about 97% of the Earth's water is salt water, which means that around 3% of the Earth's water is fresh water. Of that 3%, less than 1% is available for use, with the remaining being frozen fresh water. So while water is technically a renewable source, it is a very limited resource. Water is also known as a universal solvent, meaning it is able to dissolve more substances than anything else on Earth. This is why we have beautiful blue waters and flavored drink mixes, but it also makes water extremely susceptible to pollution. Once water is polluted, it is costly and difficult to remove the pollutants. More often than not, it's impossible to remove them. About 40% of rivers and lakes in the US are too polluted to fish out of. Pollution not only affects the wildlife and plant life that call these waters home, but it also impacts our health. According to the NRDC, unsafe water kills more people each year than war and all other forms of violence combined. So what exactly is pollution? Pollution in general is the addition of harmful substances to the environment that has a harmful effect. Water pollution is the addition of these substances to a water system, making it toxic. Some of the different types of pollutants are pathogens. These are pollutants that cause diseases like cholera and giardia, and largely come from human and animal waste. It can also be organic matter, chemical pollution, plastic pollution, and emerging pollutants such as pharmaceuticals. These types of pollutants can be separated into two categories. The first category is pollutants that cause harm to the environment, aquatic life, or humans by causing disease or physical damage. The second category are pollutants that cause a decrease in oxygen in the water. This causes anaerobic decay and the death of aquatic life. So where do all of these pollutants come from? Well, to answer that, we need to talk about a couple of terms. The first term being point source pollution. This is pollution that comes from a single source. Think of it as you can point directly at the source. While this pollution originates in one specific source, it can affect miles of waterways and the ocean. This is because all waters in a watershed flow to one river, which eventually leads to the ocean. The EPA is able to regulate point source pollution by determining limits on what can be discharged by one facility into a body of water. An example of point source pollution is discharge from wastewater treatment plants. In contrast, the other term is non-point source pollution. Non-point source pollution is pollution that comes from multiple sources and cannot be tracked back to their origin. Non-point source pollution is extremely difficult to regulate because there is no single responsible party. It is also the leading cause of pollution in the US. Some examples of non-point source pollution include runoff from agriculture and stormwater, as well as debris blown into waterways from land. Now, we can't discuss all the sources of water pollution, but we're going to talk about the 5 major sources of pollution. The first major source is agriculture. Agriculture is the leading cause of water degradation around the world. Agriculture is not only a major polluter, but it is also the biggest consumer of fresh water globally, using 70% of the Earth's surface water. According to the NRDC, in the U.S., agricultural pollution is the top source of contamination in rivers and streams, the second biggest source in wetlands, and the main source in lakes. It is a major contamination in estuaries and groundwater as well. So what do we mean when we say agricultural pollution? Well, when it rains, the rain washes fertilizers, pesticides, and animal waste from farms and livestock operations into our waterways. This causes excess nutrients and pathogens to enter our waterways. As I said before, pathogens like bacteria and viruses can cause a number of diseases. Nutrient pollution is the number one threat to water quality worldwide. Nutrient pollution is caused by excess nitrogen and phosphorus in water or air, and this can cause algal blooms. The excess nutrients in the water allows algae to grow like crazy in a short amount of time. This growth of algae covers the surface and blocks sunlight from reaching the underwater plants, while also consuming oxygen in the water. Eventually, the algae dies, and the oxygen in the water is consumed as the algae decays. This creates what is called a dead zone, as it makes it impossible for aquatic life to survive. The largest dead zone in the U.S. is about 6,500 square miles and occurs every summer in the Gulf of Mexico because of nutrient pollution from the Mississippi River Basin. Algal blooms can produce chemicals or toxins, and these algal blooms are called harmful algal blooms and can be harmful to human health and aquatic life. These algal blooms are the result of blue-green algae. Harmful algal blooms can occur in lakes, reservoirs, rivers, ponds, bays, and coastal waters. The second major source of pollution is sewage and wastewater. So what exactly is wastewater? Well, wastewater is used water. The water comes from residential sources like sinks, showers, and toilets, essentially sewage, as well as from commercial, industrial, and agricultural sources, which includes metals, solvents, and toxic sludge. Wastewater also includes stormwater runoff. Stormwater runoff happens when rain carries road salt, grease, oil, chemicals, and litter from roads and sidewalks to our waterways. According to the UN, more than 80% of the world's wastewater goes back into the environment without being treated or reused. That number rises to over 95% in least developed countries. According to the NRDC, wastewater treatment plants process 34 billion gallons of water per day. Wastewater treatment plants use a process to reduce the amount of pollutants such as pathogens, nitrogen, and phosphorus in sewage, as well as heavy metals and toxic chemicals in industrial waste. Once they have reduced the amount of pollutants, the water is discharged back into the waterways. However, this system doesn't work perfectly. It is unable to remove all the pollutants, especially pharmaceuticals and microplastics. According to the EPA, the United States' aging and easily overwhelmed sewage treatment systems releases more than 850 billion gallons of untreated wastewater a year. The third major source of pollution is oil pollution. Everyone knows of big oil spills that have happened in the ocean. However, the majority of oil pollution comes from consumers. This includes oil and gas drips from millions of cars and trucks every day. The NRDC estimates that 1 million tons of oil makes its way into the ocean every year. Nearly half of that 1 million tons of oil doesn't come from oil spills in the ocean, but instead comes from land sources such as factories, farms, and cities. Only 10% of the oil in the environment comes from tanker spills in the ocean. And 1/3 of oil pollution comes from regular operations of the shipping industry, such as legal and illegal discharge. The fourth major source of pollution is radioactive substances. Radioactive waste includes any pollution that emits radiation that is greater than what is released by the environment. It is produced by uranium mining, nuclear power plants, the production and testing of military weapons, and by universities and hospitals that use radioactive materials for research and medicine. Radioactive waste disposal is a major challenge as it can stay in the environment for thousands of years. For example, in Washington, the decommissioned Hanford nuclear weapons production site, they need to clean up 56 million gallons of radioactive waste, and it is expected to cost $100 billion and take through 2060 to clean up. Radioactive waste that ends up in the environment through accidental release or improper disposal threatens every water source, as in groundwater, surface water, and the ocean. The last major pollution source that we are going to talk about is plastic pollution. Plastic pollution is a major issue for every waterway. As plastic breaks down, it breaks down into smaller pieces called microplastics. Fish then eat these pieces, and then we eat the fish. This leads to humans eating 40 pounds of plastic in a lifetime. Microplastics are in our air, water, and food. Like I said earlier, wastewater treatment plants can't remove these microplastics from the water. This all leads to us intaking 74,000 microplastic particles a year. Plastic pollution often gets swept up in sewers and storm drains, which eventually leads them out to the ocean. This pollution sometimes consolidates, forming floating garbage patches. Plastic pollution can cause many issues for wildlife and is responsible for harming more than 200 different marine species. We've all heard of sea turtles eating plastic bags thinking they are jellyfish, or nets wrapping around wildlife like seals, lions, dolphins, sharks. The list goes on and on, causing the nets to dig into their skin, which causes major injuries or even death. There is a saying in conservation, a fishing net never stops fishing, meaning though a fishing net or line is no longer attached to a pole or boat, it doesn't stop capturing wildlife and can cause even more harm loose in the water. However, the physical damage that plastic can cause is not the only concern we have. Plastics are made from fossil fuels, as in oil and natural gas, as well as thousands of other chemicals that are used to make plastic harder, softer, and more flexible. These chemicals can not only leach into the food that touches the plastic, but also leaches into the environment as the plastic decomposes. We will, in the future, spend a full episode on plastic. However, there is a great organization called the Story of Stuff Project, which I will link their website below in the description. And they made a fantastic documentary on plastic pollution that I definitely recommend watching. So we've spent some time talking about what exactly water pollution is, and to be honest, we've just begun to scratch the surface on all the types of pollution. But what effects does water pollution have? We've talked a lot about effects water pollution can have in the environment, from algal blooms to plastic pollution. There's one impact on the environment that we have yet to talk about in this episode, and that is heavy metals and chemicals that are discharged by industrial and wastewater that are toxic to aquatic life. These pollutants often reduce an organism's lifespan and their ability to reproduce. These pollutants can make their way up the food chain when predators eat prey. For example, this is how tuna and other big fish accumulate high levels of mercury, and this process is called bioaccumulation. Water pollution doesn't just affect the environment, but also human health. Water pollution literally kills. According to Lancet, in 2019, water pollution was responsible for 1.4 million premature deaths. Water pollution or unsafe water sickens 1 billion people annually. Low-income communities are unfortunately at disproportionately higher risk because they are often closest to the major polluting industries. A good example of how dangerous chemical and industrial pollution can be is Flint, Michigan. Cost-cutting and aging water infrastructure created a lead contamination, and they still cannot drink their water 9 years later. An even more recent example is the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, where the contamination of their water has led to pets dying, people getting sick, and the last count I heard was 5,000 fish dead. The issue of water pollution doesn't end in Flint or even East Palestine, though. Chemical pollutants such as heavy metal like mercury and arsenic, pesticides, and nitrate fertilizers are getting into our water supplies. Once these pollutants are ingested, they can cause several health issues like cancer, hormone disruption, and even altered brain function. Swimming can also pose a risk, as the EPA estimates 3.5 million Americans contract health issues like skin rashes, pink eye, respiratory issues, and hepatitis every year from swimming in sewage-laden coastal waters. I want to be clear that I'm not saying all of this to scare you from drinking tap water. I drink it every day. And in actuality, 1/3 of bottled water is actually tap water. I'm also not trying to scare you from going swimming in your local lake. I want you to just be aware of the problems water pollution can cause and that we face daily. So what can we do? The first thing you can do is learn about the water in your area. Where does your water come from? Is the wastewater from your home treated? Is your area in a drought? This will help you determine where you can have the most impact. I will link some helpful websites in the description to help you with this. Recruit your neighbors to join you in this endeavor. Also, you can reduce your plastic consumption as much as possible. Reuse and recycle the plastic that you can't reduce when you can. Dispose of chemical cleaners, oils, and non-biodegradable items properly to prevent them from going down the drain. Maintain your car to prevent it from leaking oil, antifreeze, and coolant. If you have a yard, consider using landscaping that reduces runoff, like a rain garden, which we talked about last week. Avoid using pesticides, herbicides, and nitrate fertilizers. Don't flush your old medications. Dispose of them in the trash so they don't end up in our waterways. Be aware of anything you pour in stormwater drains. This wastewater is often not treated before being released into your local waterways. Don't litter, and pick up any litter you see, especially around stormwater drains. This will help prevent litter from entering the waterways and also help with street flooding. If you have a pet, make sure you clean up after it. And lastly, use your voice. One of the best ways to stand up against water pollution is to speak out in support of the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act has held polluters responsible for over 50 years. However, the Clean Water Act is no longer enough. We need new regulations that help protect our waters from modern-day challenges like microplastics and pharmaceuticals. Use your voice to tell the federal government, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and your local elected officials that you support water protection and investments in infrastructure like wastewater treatment and lead pipe removal programs. We cannot do this alone. We need to show support for these regulations and infrastructure if we are ever going to see a change. And to be quite frank, we need to show this support for not only the health of the environment, but our own health and the health of those we love. At the end of the day, All of our waterways are connected in some way or another. So the pollution that happens in one area affects not just that area. We all need to do our part in order to make a difference. So get out there, use your voice, do what you can, and until next time, be safe out there. Bye, guys.